Each week, we have an in-depth conversation with one of the key players in the legislative process. This week, we welcome Senator Hob Bryan, a Democrat from Amory. Senator Bryan is the chairman of the Senate's Public Health and Welfare Committee. He was first elected to the state Senate in 1983. Now in his 42nd year, he is the longest-serving member in that chamber. Senator Hob Bryan, welcome to At Issue today.
Thank you.
Good to have you with us. You have been outspoken in your opposition to the tax cut plans that the House and the Senate have passed. This week we learned that the federal government may demand more than $100 million in repayment and fines for misused welfare funds. We're also seeing a downturn in the stock market, a lot of economic uncertainty nationally. Do you think these factors might cause some lawmakers to put the brakes on some of these massive tax cuts?
Well, the $100 million is just a drop in the bucket. And I never thought I would live to say $100 million is just a drop in the bucket, but that's where we are. We basically run the state off about 50-50 federal funds, state funds, maybe 40%, but a huge percentage of our budget is federal funds, $13 billion a year. The highway department, the money we use to maintain roads, is about half federal funds. The Department of Medicaid is about 75% federal funds. The Department of Health, including just the basic funding that we have, is way over 50% federal funds, and we use those for just basic operations. So if there's going to be a reduction in federal funds, and it seems like there is, that's almost certain to have a major impact on our budget, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. I'm not getting into. I'm just saying what the federal government decides about funding and freezing funds and all has a huge impact on our budget. And that's just very uncertain. The result of the tariffs and other economic changes is uncertain. I don't know if ultimately there'll be good, bad. That's not for me to say. I'm just saying from a state level, we don't know what the impact on the economy will be, certainly not in the near future. That's a very big unknown. We also have the situation where recently we've been receiving various funds, ARPA funds, stimulus money, and the state treasury has done right well because there's been that influx of money. That's all drying up anyway. That economic effect is not going to be with us, and we're not going to have the tax collections that resulted from that. At the same time, our expenses are going up. I've been here long enough to know that we had a $600 million highway program, which we thought was all the money in the world, to 4-lane highways all over the state.
Back in the 80s.
Yeah, 72, 78, 82, 45, 40.
You're saying the highway numbers.
I lose count of all the highways. Highways in every part of the state. Now there are two interchanges in particular, one that's proposed in Tupelo and one that's actually underway in Marshall County, each of which will cost well over $100 million just for two interchanges. We tried to run the highway department off the gasoline tax, but the gasoline tax is a cents per gallon tax. So it's not keeping up with inflation and has not been for 30, 40 years. And the cost of highways has just gone through the roof, particularly here lately. So we're not ever going to be able to raise the gas tax high enough to run the highway department off the gasoline tax. It's got to have some sort of contribution from the state. Then there's the situation with the retirement system. And no matter what we do about the retirement system, you're going to have to put at least $100 million a year and probably more into the retirement system from state revenue. So you've got all of those factors to consider, some of which just came up since January. And against this backdrop, the House wants to eventually abolish the income tax, which is something like a third of our general fund budget. It's a couple of $1 billion. We just don't have that. And it's the height of irresponsibility for us to be doing anything long-term like that about taxes in this environment.
You paint a pretty bleak picture of our financial future, even without abolishing the income tax.
Bleak is such a strong word, however accurate it may be.
Negative.
I think the problem is not merely the downturns and the shortage of revenue that seems almost certain. It's layered upon that the complete uncertainty about what's going to go on with the economy. And nobody knows what's going to happen with the economy the next little bit.
What about the argument in favor of eliminating the state income tax, that if we no longer have a state income tax, it will attract more people to Mississippi, more businesses, more residents will come here because they know they don't have to pay a state income tax?
Well, that's laughable on its face is the short answer. I mean, again, do you think everybody in Manhattan's going to go down to the Port Authority bus terminal and get on a bus to Mississippi just because they hear we ain't got no income tax down here? People live where they want to live. And the sad thing about abolishing the income tax is we have a desperate need for infrastructure in Mississippi. We have a desperate need for roads, water, sewer. If the state doesn't pay for those things, those costs get passed down to the local level. And we've got to have good infrastructure to attract people and internet speed, on and on and on. Not everyone wants to live in what is basically a rural area, but some people do. And we need to get about making Mississippi as attractive as we can for them. But there's just no reason anywhere, anytime, any place to suggest that any substantial number of people move because you don't have an income tax. If we need an example locally, for years, the population of DeSoto County, which is just south of Memphis, has gone through the roof. I think it's like 4 or 5 times bigger than it used to be, if not more. That's people moving from Memphis. There is, or was at the time when all this started, no income tax in Tennessee. There was an income tax in Mississippi. People were leaving Tennessee where there's no income tax to move to Mississippi where there is an income tax. If you look at New York City, it's the most overtaxed, overregulated place imaginable. It's the biggest city ever in the United States. It's getting bigger every day. So taxation just does not determine where people live.
Understood. You mentioned tariffs, the Trump administration's tariffs, and the uncertainty with regard to how they might affect Mississippi. What do you think could happen if these tariffs do go through as the president has promised?
I don't know. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think that's the only honest answer from anyone is we don't know. Mm-hmm. We'll certainly know more next year. But if we needed any other reason not to pass this huge tax cut that the House has, coupled with huge tax increases, I'm not sure everyone knows exactly what all goes on with the House plan, but in order to abolish the income tax, they're going to raise the sales tax 1.5%. They're going to raise the gasoline tax 15 cents a gallon. I mean, it is this obsession with the income tax that I just don't understand. And Wilson, this is what's really sad. The state is full of business people, business leaders, who know that getting rid of the income tax is an irresponsible thing to do. They know that the state needs revenue. They know this is no time to be doing something long-term like this, but they will not speak up in public. And in private, they will say these things. We desperately, desperately need for the business leaders and community leaders around the state who know full well that we don't need to abolish the income tax and really don't need to be doing anything major in this session with all the uncertainty. We need for them to speak out and help some of us who are trying to preach the gospel.
Why, if that is true, do you think they are being silent?
I don't know. We don't have, just in the broad general terms, the civic engagement that we used to have. Things are much more siloed than they used to be. media is more diverse. There are no newspapers. So there's not the constant awareness that there used to be. I mean, I commend public broadcasting and others who do have public affairs programs and do report on the news, but it's still not the same as having a newspaper on your front door every day when you wake up. And as you know, the Associated Press no longer even has an employee in the state of Mississippi. Many newspapers have gone out of business or have dramatically reduced circulation. It's just not the same. People are not following what's going on in state government like they used to. I think that's part of it. And I think also to some extent they know that the leadership in the House is very much in favor of the abolishing the income tax and the governor, and they don't want to pick a fight with the governor and with the House leadership.
You chair the Public Health and Welfare Committee in the Senate. What do you think can be done to change people's behavior for better health outcomes in Mississippi?
Well, it's like turning an ocean liner around. I spend a lot of time thinking about health care. And one of the things that has dawned on me slowly is from a public policy standpoint, we have really a balkanized system. We have the division of Medicaid over here by itself, and the head of Medicaid who just left, when he retired, said he was very proud he'd held down the Medicaid budget. But we have other budgets where we're paying for money with 100 cents on the dollar state funds that we could be paying for the same thing with 75% federal funds if we could just coordinate. But if you're at Medicaid, you're looking at the size of the Medicaid budget. We need to look at things comprehensively. We have a separate State Department of Mental Health. 2/3 of the states don't have that. We have
Are you saying that it should be lumped in with another department, or you're saying that's good that we have that?
I'm not suggesting that we have one super agency. I am suggesting there's a lack of coordination, and it's that reason that a couple of years ago, having been thinking about this, there's no entity, there's nobody in the state of Mississippi who has the statutory charge to look comprehensively at healthcare everywhere in the state. The healthcare that's delivered at the Department of Corrections, what's going on with hospitals. We talk a lot about the need to make sure we have maternal care in the Delta, things like that.
I think a lot of people would assume that the state health department has that
responsibility. They have not had that charge. They have had the obligation to prepare a state health plan, and in that state health plan, look at what is needed. But there's no charge to figure out how to do that. And so a couple of years ago, we gave them that direct responsibility. Even before the statutory change, the Department of Health was looking at changing their state health plan and being more comprehensive. We're a couple of years into that, and of course it takes time, but I think that's a step in the right direction. The legislation that we passed says the State Department of Health has no additional authority to make anybody do anything, except all state agencies are supposed to cooperate and give them information. So we're not trying to make the state health department the boss of everybody. We want to make the state health department the central place where we look at health care, and they cooperate with everybody else and vice versa, but they have no authority to make anybody do anything.
Several bills died.
In that regard.
Yeah, right. Gotcha. Several bills died in your committee that our listeners have expressed some interest in, so I'd like to get your thoughts on some of them. House Bill 849, the advanced practice nurses release from some collaboration with physician requirements that had been there, where nurse practitioners, for example, could operate more independently.
Well, I've spent a great deal of time, because I know there's interest in this, looking at the situation with nurse practitioners practicing separate and apart from doctors. The dilemma that I cannot find a solution for is the vast difference in training that nurse practitioners get. It's just not standardized. If you're a doctor and you go to a medical school and have a residency, that's generally standardized. If you've been to any medical school, there's certain requirements that you've met, certain training that you have. But that's not the case with nurse practitioners. A lot of the training can be done over the internet, and particularly disturbing is the equivalency of residency. In other words, when a doctor finishes medical school, or as part of that, he goes through a period of residency in which education is a part of that. It's built into the operation. That's a mission that they have. In some instances, some schools who award degrees basically tell their graduates, go find someone to mentor you. And there's no oversight, there's no standardization, and the individual doctor may or may not have the interest in education that one would hope. So it's a frustrating situation, because there are nurse practitioners who are very well trained and quite competent, and I think it's just the lack of consistency in their training that makes it difficult to go forward.
House Bill 927 would impose state regulations on midwives.
We're going to continue to look at the issue of midwifery over the summer. I don't want us to have a situation where we encourage and steer one class of people to midwives and others to OBGYNs. I think, at least from my perspective, there's so much problem. We have such a problem with not only infant mortality, but bad outcomes because of things that happen during pregnancy, that we need to do everything we can to get pregnant women under the care of a OBGYN, even, and their midwives that work in conjunction with OBGYNs and doctors' offices all over the state. I'm very leery of again, a group of people operating independently of someone who has a medical degree.
House Bill 928, known as the rape kit bill, would have required hospitals to maintain and offer rape kits. What happened with that one?
Well, they already do, and in talking to the hospitals, they say that the representations being made by the proponents of the bill are just not accurate. I don't want to impose regulations on hospitals without having time to find out exactly what the problems are, if there are problems, and how to address them. I think that's something that we're likely to look at next year, but just someone came to me about this late in the day, and I didn't feel comfortable going forward this year after talking to some hospitals.
What legislative action this session do you see as positive for the people of Mississippi?
Positive.
Yes. Anything?
Well, yes, I think there are, and I'm not trying to be silly or when I say this. The abolition of the income tax would be so devastating to future generations. If you think about it, you and I both have been driving on roads that someone built before we were born. We've been drinking water out of water systems that were put in before we were born. We've been using sewer systems that were there before we were born. The previous generation left that to us. They left us highways. We need to leave to future generations roads. We have all over the state water pipes well over a century old. It's very expensive to fix those, and in many places, the small communities where they are just simply can't afford it on their own. But everybody needs drinking water, and so if we abolish the income tax, we're cutting state revenue, which the proponents know very well. That's what the real people behind this, not the legislature, but the real outside organizations just want to shut down government. They don't believe in any government at all. And so they want to starve government. But this is money that ought to be going into infrastructure and things that will be here long after we're gone. And if you think about it, if you abolish the income tax, that will just get into situations where it'll all be used in current consumption. And the roads will deteriorate and the water and sewer systems will deteriorate. And I don't think that's a good future. It's just about taking all the wind out of the sails, worrying about that. Having said that, I guess the thing that comes to mind is our long effort going on for years to look into the issue of mental health. As you know, there are people who are in need of mental treatment who wind up getting involved in the legal system when really they just need medical attention. And people have a family member, they don't know what to do. And in many cases, they go down to the circuit clerk's office to have them civilly committed simply because they don't know where else to turn, they don't know what else to do, and there are no other services on the ground that are available and affordable to help their family member. So, number one, we need more services on the ground, and that involves training. There are shortages of personnel everywhere. But we need to change the behavior of law enforcement, and law enforcement people don't have to arrest someone who is technically committing a crime if there is a place, and there has to be a place, but if there is a place where this individual can be taken to get help, that's a solution. But law enforcement, which is very decentralized, as you know, has to be trained, and there has to be something on the ground that they can use. The intake clerks at the Chancery Clerk's office who deal with the families when they come in need to be aware of alternatives, need to encourage the family members to use alternatives, and try to divert them from the criminal justice system, the civil commitment system, instead of just saying, well, here's the form, you can fill it out.
Doesn't all that take more money? You mentioned training.
It does take money, but it also takes just a change in human behavior. And that comes with education and all. You do have to build more facilities. That's expensive. And you do have to have personnel. Personnel is always going to be expensive, but that's the key toward keeping people out of institutions. We're moving in this area. In Mississippi, the State Department of Mental Health has certain responsibilities at the state level, but we deliver community services through maybe 10 or so community mental health districts around the state, which a group of counties operates. That agency run by those group of counties is in charge of community services in that area. We've been working for a long time trying to get more coordination in that system. And so the good news is we're working and making progress in that area, and things are better. The bad news is we've still got a ways to go.
The political climate you face these days, Republican supermajorities in both the House and the Senate at the state capitol, how does that change the role of Democrats here on the state level? We've heard from Democrats who say they feel ignored by House Republicans. Is the climate any better for Democrats in the Senate?
I think there's an important thing about our state Senate that's unusual. The lieutenant governor, whoever he or she is, names committees, assigns bills to committees, chooses committee chairs. The lieutenant governor has a great deal of power, as does the speaker. The difference is the speaker is elected from within the chamber. So if you're on the wrong side of the speaker's race, and the speaker, and this is a generic speaker, and the generic speaker has enough votes on the floor, he or she really doesn't have to worry about everybody else. If you are a generic lieutenant governor, you're almost always running for statewide office. And you have to worry about the votes in every single Senate district, and you really don't want a bunch of state senators out campaigning against you. You would like to have state senators saying pleasant things about you. And that dynamic, I think, just produces a different atmosphere in the Senate. And if you believe in a bicameral system, you do want the two chambers to be different. Otherwise, why have the bicameral system? So I think the differences in the two bodies are positive, but the Mississippi State Senate has never been as partisan as a lot of other legislative bodies around the country. The Democrats can add. We know that the Republicans can, if they want to, just run everything and ignore us, but they don't want to do that, and I don't think they should. You need to listen to everybody, and they do. And I mean, obviously, it's overwhelmingly Republican atmosphere, but they're just oodles of issues, and different people have different views on those issues, regardless of their political party. People have knowledge; they have input. And it's my position that the more people you can get from the more viewpoints sitting around helping you, looking at what you're doing, helps you come up with a better product in the end. You know, we hear a lot about the extremes on the right and the extremes on the left these days, but you know, most people are in the middle. That's sort of why it is the middle. That's where most people are. And I think there is a longing on the part of everybody, and I would say in the Senate we do a pretty good job of this, of trying to take into account the views of all Mississippians.
Any predictions for these final weeks of the 2025 legislative session?
I'm not sure I'm not sure I'd be any good at making predictions. There's so much that's undetermined. Really, the whole session turns on this income tax situation, which, as we've discussed, I believe would be devastating. If we fail to pass legislation, or if we pass bad legislation, we can fix that next year. If we're short of our budgets and there's problems, there's another budget year next year. But if we take this amount of revenue out of the state budget, particularly if we do this in times of A, some uncertainty, and B, some negative features that we know are going to happen, negative in the sense of hurting the budget situation, that would be just devastating. If we can dodge that bullet, then we'll have a good session for that reason alone.
Senator Hob Bryan, we thank you for joining us on At Issue tonight.